I demanded sharply, my voice cutting through the tension as I pressed my husband for answers. 3 massive cardboard boxes lay sprawled across our room, their contents, a chaotic mess of merchandise emblazoned with my sister-in-law's girl group logo, spilling out onto the floor. Instead of explaining himself, he knelt beside the boxes, his fingers brushing over glossy posters and trinkets as if they were precious relics. When I pushed him harder, asking how he could justify wasting so much money on this absurd obsession, his reply struck like a thunderbolt. I sold your house for $360,000 and used the money to help my sister. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. You did what? I screamed,
my voice shaking with disbelief as my hands trembled.
The house, my house, left to me by my late parents, the one I had poured my heart into renovating, was gone. His laugh rang out in response, cold and indifferent, as if my devastation was a minor inconvenience. So what? It's for family, he said with a careless shrug, his tone dismissive. I am Riley Bennett, married to my 30-year-old husband, Walker, for nearly 8 years. We have no children, and my world has always revolved around him. I lost my parents when I was 18 in a car accident, and with no siblings and estranged relatives, I was utterly alone. Social anxiety kept me from forming close friendships, and I spent years drowning in grief, feeling trapped in the silence of my empty home. That's when Walker appeared, a cheerful, down-to-earth man 5 years my senior. He flirted with me on the street, and before I knew it, I was swept up by his charm. In hindsight, I see how blind I was to the warning signs. I regret marrying him deeply. Walker calls himself the breadwinner, though it couldn't be further from the truth. He's a dreamer with no follow-through,
chasing get-rich-quick schemes and racking up debt.
While he doesn't drink or become violent, a small mercy, he refuses to work consistently, leaving me to shoulder most of the financial burden with my part-time cashier job. It's not enough to make ends meet, forcing us to rely on his parents for help. My in-laws are kind people who treat me like their own daughter, a blessing I treasure since losing my family. However, they quickly learned not to entrust money to Walker. He gambled it all away. Now, they hand it to me directly, but the guilt of relying on their generosity weighs heavily on me. I hate the dependence, the helplessness. I've begged Walker countless times to find steady work, even part-time, but my words never get through. He just laughs it off, his indifference driving me to the edge of despair. I've long been ready to leave him, but the thought of breaking my in-laws' hearts holds me back. Paralyzed by indecision, I've continued living this maddening existence. One morning, as I left for work, I spotted a young girl standing near the house. She looked vaguely familiar, and after a moment, I realized it was Ariella, my husband's younger sister. At 17, she'd recently risen to fame in a girl group, her face now a staple in magazines and media. I hadn't seen her in a while, so I called out, Ariella, is that you? She turned, startled, her expression almost fearful. For a moment, she looked as if she wanted to say something, but then she bolted without a word. Confused, I stood frozen, wondering if I'd mistaken her for someone else. I'll ask my in-laws later, I decided, brushing off the encounter as I headed to work. Not long after that, Walker's behavior began to shift. Normally, he spent his days flipping through dubious pamphlets about his next big break, but now he lounged on the couch with magazines clearly meant for teenage girls. He flipped through them with casual interest, his expression disturbingly invested. A chilling realization crept over me. Was this about Ariella? Had he developed an obsession with his own sister's fame? I worried as my husband's obsession with Ariella grew. A closer look at the magazines he brought home confirmed my fears. Each one featured his younger sister, her face plastered across glossy pages. I'm going to invest in Ariella and become a very rich man, he declared, his voice brimming with confidence. His words were absurd, yet he spoke them with unshakable conviction. Soon after, he joined her fan club and began hoarding merchandise, multiple copies of the same CD, limited edition posters, and more. It wasn't long before our small apartment became a shrine to Ariella's girl group, overrun with stacks of memorabilia. Where is the money coming from? I asked again and again, my patience wearing thin, but no matter how many times I asked, my husband refused to answer. Just trust me, you'll see,
he said with an infuriating smirk before heading out yet again.
Desperate for clarity, I confided in my in-laws, but they met my concerns with weary resignation. Ariella's success was a source of pride for them, and they seemed content with Walker's support for her. However, We all knew the truth. Walker wasn't supporting Ariella out of familial love. He saw her as a golden goose, a means to make himself rich. Though we shared our frustrations, none of us dared to confront him directly.
It was then I mentioned seeing Ariella.
My in-laws exchanged puzzled glances before explaining. Ariella has moved into a dormitory provided by her agency. She's been living in the city for months now. The news stunned me. If Ariella had moved so far away, who had I seen that day, and why had she fled when I called out to her? I brushed off the encounter at the time, but unease began to creep in. Something felt off. A month passed. I watched Ariella laughing on a TV show,
Radiating joy as she performed.
Yet, despite her smiles, I couldn't shake the nagging sense that something was wrong. One afternoon, 3 massive cardboard boxes arrived at our apartment, their contents unmistakable, merchandise from Ariella's girl group. When my husband returned home, I demanded answers. He ignored me.
Instead, hurrying to the boxes as though they were treasure chests.
He knelt beside them, caressing the items inside with reverence. "Where did you get the money for all this?" I asked,
my voice trembling with suspicion.
To my horror, his response was chillingly casual. "I sold your house for $360,000 and invested it all in Ariella." I froze, disbelief washing over me. "What are you even saying? Stop joking around." But Walker's expression didn't waver. The house, the one my late parents had left me, filled with memories of my childhood.
Though I hadn't lived there since getting married.
It was my safety net, my plan B if things ever went south.
I'd spent years slowly renovating it,
pouring my parents' savings into bringing it back to life, and now it was gone. "How did you even know about the house?"
I demanded.
My voice rising in anger. Walker shrugged dismissively. "It's easy to get documents if you look hard enough. It's for my sister. Shouldn't you be happy to help family?" He laughed as though my fury was nothing more than a joke. His indifference was the final straw. Without thinking, I bolted out of the apartment, my emotions boiling over. I walked aimlessly, fists clenched, until I found myself in a quiet, desolate park. I paced until my anger dulled to a low ache, then collapsed onto a weathered bench, staring blankly into the distance.
That's when I saw her, a figure near the sandbox.
Slightly hunched. At first, I thought it was a child, but the shape and posture were unmistakable. It was her. Without hesitation, I ran toward her. "Ariella,"
I called,
and she froze. As she turned, my breath caught.
The girl standing before me was a ghost of the vibrant idol I'd seen on TV.
Her face was pale, her eyes dull and lifeless, her body weighed down by an invisible burden. She looked utterly broken.
I reached out instinctively.
But she recoiled. "Do you want something from me too?" she asked, her voice trembling with bitterness and despair. Her words pierced me. I shook my head.
Speaking softly.
"I don't want anything from you. I just want you to do one thing."
She stared at me,
confusion flickering in her tired eyes. Without another word, I turned my back and began walking away, silently hoping she would follow. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, I heard hesitant footsteps behind me.
After a brief stop at a nearby home improvement store,
we decided to head to the riverbank. The area, usually bustling with campers in the summer, was now eerily quiet in the cool autumn dusk. I set up my gas stove and heated some water, silently preparing instant noodles. Ariella sat across from me, her gaze fixed on the flickering flame, lost in her thoughts. As the water came to a boil,
I handed her a bowl.
We ate in silence, her tears quietly streaming down her face as she tried to hide her emotions. "This is where we used to camp together," I murmured, breaking the quiet. "Years ago.
Before I got married.
Back then,
Ariella had looked up to me like an older sister,
adoring me in a way only younger siblings can." The memory seemed to stir something deep within her. Her sobs continued, softer now, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. Autumn nights are cold.
And staying longer than we planned had left us unprepared.
I quickly gathered stones and dry branches to start a fire. The warmth from the flames offered some comfort as we sat side by side, both lost in thought. Ariella's life in the city had been grueling. As a young celebrity,
she was expected to mask her true feelings,
always presenting a bright, cheerful exterior. She wasn't a person, she was a product, a commodity to be sold and marketed. The pressure of it all had broken her. She confessed she couldn't talk to her parents,
fearing she would only burden them further.
"I thought about coming to you," Ariella whispered, her voice shaky. But I was scared. If I opened up to you, I felt like everything inside me would shatter. Her words hit me hard.
I knew that feeling all too well, the fear of letting your emotions spill out only to lose yourself in the process.
Without saying anything, I wrapped my arms around her, holding her tight. She leaned into me,
Her tears eventually giving way to a small,
fragile smile. As the firelight flickered in her eyes, I found myself confessing, "My husband sold my house." Ariella's face fell,
her expression was one of shock.
then immediate regret.
She apologized over and over.
"I'm so sorry.
I didn't know.
It's not your fault," I reassured her, though the pain still gnawed at me.
That house had been my sanctuary.
The place my parents left me.
It was supposed to be a refuge.
Full of memories.
But now it was gone. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion.
Ariella looked up at me.
A new resolve hardening in her eyes.
"I'll help,"
she said firmly. That night, I dropped Ariella off at my in-laws' house before heading back to my apartment. Walker was still awake when I arrived. "The sale contract for your house is finalized," he said nonchalantly.
as if it were no more than a minor inconvenience.
I fought to hold back my frustration.
"Do whatever you want,"
I replied coldly.
trying to suppress the absurdity of it all.
The next several months were marked by Walker's outbursts and increasing distance between us. I became emotionally numb.
Pulling away physically and mentally.
6 months later,
Walker joined a national tour with Ariella's girl group, leaving me to live in the quiet of my own space.
it was strange.
But I found a sense of unexpected freedom.
One spring afternoon, I returned home to find a commotion on the street. Walker was pacing in front of our apartment building, waving his phone around in distress. "It's over," he yelled. Ariella left the group.
The news spread fast.
Ariella had left the very group Walker had invested so heavily in. His entire plan had crumbled. "How much money did you throw into this?" I asked, stepping closer to him.
When he told me the staggering amount,
My anger boiled over.
But I didn't raise my voice.
Public scenes were beneath me now.
I turned to walk away, but Walker stopped me. "Our apartment's that way," he said, pointing in the wrong direction.
I live in a townhouse now,
I replied,
smiling for the first time in months.
His confusion was palpable. "What? Our apartment's that way," he insisted, pointing again. "No," I said calmly. "Ariella bought me the townhouse. We've already moved in." Walker's face drained of color as reality hit him. "Ariella worked hard to make things right," I continued, my voice steady. "She hired a lawyer, handled the divorce, and settled the debts you left behind." "Don't make decisions without me," Walker shouted, but I remained composed, refusing to engage. "You'll get the paperwork you need," I said, ending the conversation with finality. In the end, I regained my house. As the sale had been illegal, the buyer sued my husband, and he was arrested, saddled with mountains of debt. He filed for bankruptcy after serving his sentence. Even my in-laws, who had tried to support him, eventually cut ties with Walker, respecting Ariella's firm decisions. Ariella used her earnings to fund my legal battles and even gifted me the townhouse. She eventually left the entertainment industry and moved to Canada to study, rebuilding her life. As for me, I sold the townhouse,
Paid off all the debts.
and returned to my home, my reclaimed sanctuary. It's a place full of memories.
But now,
It's mine again, and I can finally live in peace. Though I'm no longer part of the Bennett family, Ariella and my in-laws continue to treat me as their own. This house, filled with history and new possibilities,
is my refuge.
I live each day with gratitude, determined to make the most of the life I've rebuilt.